My name's Owen Bennett. I'm 35. A few months ago, my mother texted me for the first time in 6 years, and it wasn't an apology. It wasn't even, "How are you?" It was a screenshot of our house on Zillow with one line underneath. "Is this really yours? We should talk." 6 years of nothing, and the thing that finally got her to reach out was a real estate listing. To explain why that text made me sit down and just stare at my phone for a few minutes, I have to go back to a dinner table in Cherry Creek, 6 years earlier, the night my mother told me, very calmly, that I was about to ruin my life. This is a place where ordinary people share the moment they stop shrinking themselves to fit into rooms that were never built for them. If that's ever been you, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Okay, let me take you back. I grew up in Cherry Creek, which, if you don't know Denver, is the kind of neighborhood where the lawns are professionally edged and everyone's garage has at least one car nobody actually drives. My father, Richard Bennett, is a cardiologist, has been for over 30 years. My mother, Diane, sat on the board of 2 hospital foundations and ran the household with the same precision my father used in an operating room. Nothing in that house was ever loud, and nothing was ever messy. If my parents disagreed about something, it happened behind a closed door in low voices, and by the next morning, everyone acted like it hadn't. I have one sibling, my sister Renee, 3 years older. Renee did everything in the right order. Good grades, a degree from a school my parents could mention at dinner parties, and then she married a guy named Trent who works in private equity. Their wedding had 240 guests and a band flown in from Nashville. I remember my mother crying happy tears during the toasts. I'd never seen her cry before that. I was always the quieter one. I studied computer science, which my dad treated like a slightly embarrassing hobby. Not bad, just not what he'd pictured. "As long as you're happy," he'd say, in the tone people use when they don't actually mean that. I met Tasha Reyes when I was 27. She was an ICU nurse at the hospital where my dad had privileges, which is its own kind of irony I didn't appreciate until much later. We met because my grandmother was admitted with pneumonia, and Tasha was on her unit for 4 straight nights. I noticed the way she talked to my grandmother, not loudly, not performatively kind, just steady. She remembered my grandmother liked her water with no ice. She remembered she got cold easily and kept an extra blanket folded at the foot of the bed without anyone asking. I asked Tasha out 3 weeks after my grandmother was discharged. She said yes on the condition that I not be one of those guys who thinks nursing is just being a doctor's assistant. I told her I didn't think that. I was lying a little, not about Tasha, but about how deep that assumption ran in my family, without any of us ever saying it out loud. We dated for 2 years. I introduced her to my parents about 6 months in. My mother was polite, Cherry Creek polite, which is a very specific temperature, warm enough that you can't point to anything wrong, cold enough that you feel it in your chest on the drive home. She asked Tasha where she went to school. Tasha told her, a state nursing program, 3 years, while working 2 jobs to pay for it. My mother said, "How resourceful," and then turned to ask me about a promotion at work that I hadn't actually gotten yet. I proposed to Tasha on a Tuesday, no ring yet, just a question over takeout in my apartment. She said yes. I called my parents that Friday to tell them. There was a pause on the line. Then my mother said, "Owen, can I be honest with you?" Which in our family was never actually a question. She said marrying Tasha was a mistake. Not because Tasha was a bad person, she made a point of saying that twice, but because, and I remember this almost word for word, marriages work best when 2 people come from the same world, Owen. You're going to spend the rest of your life explaining each other to people, and eventually that gets exhausting. You'll regret this. You'll regret this. 3 words, in the same calm voice she used to tell me as a kid that my report card could be better. My father got on the extension. He didn't argue with her. He just said, "Your mother has a point about compatibility, son. Think it through." I married Tasha 8 months later anyway. Small wedding, 42 people, a backyard in Golden, Colorado, string lights, a taco truck because Tasha's family insisted, and honestly, it was the best decision anyone made that whole day. My parents came. They smiled in the photos. My mother gave a toast that mentioned new chapters and wishing them well, and never once said Tasha's name. 3 weeks after the wedding, my mother called and asked if Tasha and I had thought more about the things she'd said. I told her we were married, Mom. There's nothing to think about. She said, "I just don't want you to look back in 10 years and wish you'd listened." I told her I loved my wife, and I needed her to either be happy for us or keep her concerns to herself. She chose a third option. She went quiet. Not dramatically. There was no final fight, no slammed phone. It was more like a thermostat being turned down 1 degree at a time until you realize the whole house is cold. Calls became texts. Texts got rarer. My mother stopped asking about Tasha entirely, like she'd edited her out of every sentence. Renee still texted me sometimes, but carefully, the way you text someone whose situation the family has quietly agreed not to bring up. By our first anniversary, a full year had gone by without my parents calling Tasha by name, in person or otherwise. By the second, my mother had stopped including Tasha in holiday invitations. It would just be, "We'd love to see you, Owen." And when I said that meant both of us or neither of us, the invitations mostly stopped too. The hard part to explain to anyone who hasn't lived this is that nobody ever actually said, "We're cutting you off." There was no scene. It was 6 years of my mother managing the relationship down to almost nothing, one polite non-invitation at a time, while telling herself, I'm sure of this, that she was simply respecting our choices. If anyone watching has ever had a parent disapprove of who you married, not loudly but in that slow, suffocating, I'm just being honest way, I genuinely like to hear about it in the comments. I think a lot more people carry this than ever talk about it. So let me tell you what those 6 years actually looked like for us, because it matters for what comes later. Tasha kept working ICU, 12-hour shifts, 3 or 4 a week, the kind of job where you come home and don't talk for an hour because your nervous system needs to come down off a ledge. I was a product manager at a healthcare software company, the kind that builds scheduling systems for hospitals. And here's the thing about being married to a nurse while working in healthcare software. You start noticing, very specifically, all the ways those systems are built by people who've never worked a floor. Tasha would come home and vent about the scheduling software at her hospital. It would auto-assign nurses to back-to-back shifts with no rest between them, and it didn't track certifications properly, so sometimes a nurse without the right training would get put on a unit that needed it. The whole thing felt like it had been designed from a spreadsheet by someone who'd never once stood at a nurse's station at 3 a.m. I started sketching things on napkins. Tasha started telling me what was wrong with the sketches, in detail, with the kind of specificity that only comes from living inside a problem for 9 years. After about a year of that, what I had wasn't a napkin anymore. It was a real product plan, a scheduling and credentialing platform built around the constraints nurses actually deal with, not the ones administrators assume they deal with. I quit my job 31 months into the silence. My parents didn't know, because by then there wasn't really a channel for that kind of news to travel. I told them eventually, in a short email my dad replied to with 2 sentences. "That sounds risky, hope it works out." No follow-up questions, nothing like, "Tell me more." I read that email twice, looking for anything underneath it, and found nothing. Tasha kept her ICU job for the first 18 months of the company. We needed the steady paycheck and, frankly, her insurance, since I was a man in my early 30s whose own father, a cardiologist, had no idea his son didn't have health coverage. She'd work her shifts, come home, and then spend 2 hours at our kitchen table helping me build out the credentialing module, because she was the only person I knew who could tell me instantly whether a feature would survive contact with an actual hospital floor. The company was called Crestline. We started with one hospital system in Colorado, a mid-sized network with 11 facilities. By year 3, we had 4 hospital systems across 2 states. By year 4, we'd raised a Series A, $9.2 million, and Tasha had left bedside nursing to join Crestline full-time as our Director of Clinical Operations, which is a fancy title for the person who keeps us honest about what nurses actually need. We bought a house in the Highlands in Denver in year 5. Not a mansion, 4 bedrooms, a converted garage that Tasha turned into a reading room with the kind of deep, soft chair she'd wanted her whole career and never had time to sit in. We paid $1.15 million, which in that Denver market was a real number but not an outrageous one, a solidly upper-middle-class house in a neighborhood that had gotten expensive fast. We didn't tell my parents about the house. Not out of spite, we just didn't have a channel for that kind of news anymore. 6 years of silence does something to information flow. You stop assuming your parents are part of the audience for your life. If you've ever built something, a career, a life, entirely outside the view of people who were supposed to be cheering you on, I want you to know it still counts. So here's how the Zillow thing happened. My mother, it turns out, has a habit, Renee told me this later, of browsing real estate listings in Denver for fun, the way some people scroll vacation rentals they'll never book. Cherry Creek people do this a lot. It's part curiosity, part keeping score. One evening in March, 6 years and 2 months after that phone call about, "You'll regret this," my mother was scrolling listings in the Highlands, a neighborhood she'd always considered up and coming, which in Cherry Creek means fine for other people. She came across a listing for a house 2 doors down from ours that had just gone on the market, and in the background of one of the photos, over the fence, was our house, our porch light, our Subaru in the driveway, the one with a sticker on the back window that says, "I see you, nurse, ask me about your heart rate," which Tasha put there as a joke and refuses to take off because, and I quote, "it filters out people I don't want to talk to at gas stations." My mother recognized the car. Somehow she recognized the house. And, this part I only learned later, she actually looked up our address, found our old Zillow listing from when we bought the place, and sat on that information for 11 days before texting me. 11 days. I know because she told me, almost proudly, like it was evidence of restraint. The text came on a Tuesday evening. I was making dinner. Tasha was in the reading room with her feet up, finally off a long stretch of shifts. My phone buzzed on the counter and I saw, "Mom," a contact I hadn't heard from in so long it felt like seeing a name light up on a gravestone. It was a screenshot of our Zillow listing from 5 years ago, showing the purchase price. Underneath, "Is this really yours? We should talk." I stood there holding my phone for a long time. Tasha came into the kitchen, saw my face, and asked what was wrong. I showed her the screen. She read it twice, handed the phone back, and said, "So now she wants to talk." I didn't respond that night, or the next day. On the third day, my mother texted again. "I'm not trying to upset you, Owen. I just think it's time we all moved forward as a family. Life is short." Moved forward. As a family. I must have read that line 6 times, and what got me wasn't what she said, it was everything she left out. There was no, "I'm sorry for how I treated Tasha." No, "I was wrong about the two of you." Nothing about why 6 years had passed in the first place, just moved forward. Like the last 6 years had been some weather event that happened to all of us equally, with nobody actually responsible for it. I talked to Tasha about it that weekend, sitting on our back deck with coffee. She didn't tell me what to do, she never does. She asked what I wanted. I told her honestly. I didn't want to cut my parents out forever. My dad is 68, my mom is 65. More than once over those 6 years, I'd thought about what it would mean if one of them got sick and we were still like this. But I also wasn't going to pretend the last 6 years hadn't happened just because a Zillow listing had made them curious again. So I wrote back 4 words. "We can have dinner." If you've ever had to decide whether to let someone back into your life after they made it very clear they didn't want you there as you actually are, you probably already know how complicated that feels. We met at a restaurant in Cherry Creek, my parents' pick, which I noticed but didn't think much of at the time. A Thursday, 6 weeks after the text. Tasha came with me. I made that non-negotiable, gently but clearly, in a way that surprised even me a little. If this was a reconciliation, it included both of us, or it wasn't happening. My parents were already seated. My mother stood and hugged me first, then turned to Tasha and, for the first time in 6 years, said her name. "Tasha, it's good to see you." It came out smooth, almost rehearsed, like a line she'd practiced in the car. The first 20 minutes were the kind of conversation you have with acquaintances at a wedding. The weather, Renee's kids, my dad's retirement plans, which apparently involve a boat he's been talking about for a decade. Nobody mentioned the 6 years. Nobody mentioned the phone call. It felt like we'd paused a conversation mid-sentence and were now picking it back up, except the sentence had been, "You'll regret this," and nobody wanted to finish it. Then my mother set down her wine glass, and I recognized the gesture, the same precise little movement she used to make right before saying something she'd been building toward all evening. "Owen," she said, "your father and I have been thinking. Renee mentioned that your company had some kind of funding round recently." She said it lightly, like she'd just remembered, though I really knew, that Renee mentioned meant Renee had been asked, probably more than once. I said yes, we'd raised a Series A. "That's wonderful," she said. "And this big house in the Highlands. Owen, we're just so happy things have worked out for you." Worked out, like a coin flip had landed well. My father cleared his throat, the sound I remembered from childhood, the one that always came right before something he'd clearly rehearsed. "Owen, I'll be straightforward. I'm retiring next year. The practice is good, but the transition is going to be complicated, and frankly, the kind of software you're building, the scheduling and credentialing piece, we could really use something like that. I was wondering if Crestline might be able to help us out, maybe even some kind of advisory role for me. I still know a lot of people in this town. I could open doors for you." So that was it. 6 years of silence, a text about a Zillow listing, my wife's name said out loud for the first time in years, and underneath all of it, my father's retiring practice and my mother's sudden interest in moving forward as a family, arriving the exact moment they found out I had money and connections worth something to them. I looked at Tasha. She didn't say anything, but her hand found mine under the table, steady, the way I imagine she's held a lot of hands in a lot of bad moments. For about 3 seconds, the part of me that spent 30 years trying to make this exact woman proud almost said yes. Almost said, "Sure, Dad, let's talk about it." Because some part of me still wanted, badly, for this to be the moment everything got fixed. But then I thought about the 11 days my mother sat on that Zillow screenshot before deciding I was worth reaching out to, and about 6 years of holidays where Tasha's name simply wasn't said, and about the way my mother had clearly practiced saying Tasha in the car on the way here, like a word in a language she didn't want to mispronounce in front of company. So I said, "Mom, Dad, before we talk about any of that, I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer it, not move past it." My mother's smile flickered. "Of course, sweetheart." 6 years ago, I said, you told me marrying Tasha would be a mistake. You said I'd regret it. And then for 6 years you basically edited her out of our family. No holidays that included her, no calls that mentioned her, nothing. I need to know, do you still feel that way? And if you don't, I need to actually hear that from you. Not, let's move forward. I need to hear what you think you got wrong. The table went quiet. My father looked at his plate. My mother's hand moved toward her wine glass and then stopped, like she'd thought better of it. "Owen," she said carefully, "I think we all said things—" "No," I said, gently but clearly. "Not we all. You said something specific to me, on the phone, 3 weeks after my wedding, and then you spent 6 years acting on it. I'm not angry anymore, Mom, I promise. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend the last 6 years were just life happening, especially not on the same night you're asking Crestline to help with Dad's retirement." My mother's face did something I'd genuinely never seen before. It went still, and then, slowly, it kind of crumpled around the eyes. For a second, she looked less like the woman who'd raised me, and more like someone realizing, in real time, exactly how she'd been seen for the last 6 years. "I was wrong," she said, quietly. "About Tasha, about all of it." She looked at Tasha directly, which she had never once done in all the years I'd known her. "I'm sorry, I should have said that a long time ago, and I shouldn't have needed a reason to." Tasha didn't say anything right away. She's good at silence, it's part of what makes her good at her job. After a moment she said, "Thank you for saying that, I mean it." Then, gently, "But I think what Owen's asking is bigger than an apology to me. It's whether anything actually changes, or whether this is just a nice dinner and then 6 more years. I told my parents what I needed, plainly, the way Tasha has taught me to do over the years without even meaning to. I told them I wasn't interested in a business arrangement that hadn't existed for 6 years and suddenly existed now that money was involved. I told them if they wanted a relationship with us, both of us, it would have to start as just that, a relationship. Calls that asked about Tasha's work, not just mine. Invitations that said both our names. No more pretending the last 6 years were a misunderstanding instead of a choice. My dad, to his credit, was the one who said, "That's fair, Owen. That's completely fair." My mother didn't say much else that night, but 2 days later she texted Tasha, not me, asking how a hard shift she'd mentioned at dinner had gone. It was small. It was also the first time in 6 years my mother had started a conversation with my wife about anything at all. So that's where things stand now, about 8 months later. We're not in each other's pockets. My parents didn't get an advisory deal with Crestline. I told my dad, kindly, that mixing business into what we were trying to rebuild felt like exactly the wrong move. And to both our surprise, he agreed and dropped it without pushing. He's working with a transition consultant for the practice now, someone Renee found, completely unconnected to me. My mother and Tasha have had coffee twice, just the two of them. I wasn't there either time, on purpose. Tasha told me that the second time, my mother actually asked, with real curiosity, what it's like being the person in the room when a family gets the worst news of their life. Tasha said it was the first time my mother had ever asked her a question about her job that wasn't really a question about me. I don't know exactly where this goes. Some of it might stay distant for good. 6 years happened, and 6 years don't just unhappen because someone says sorry over a steakhouse table. But the version of me who used to organize his whole life around earning that approval, he's mostly gone, and I can't say I miss him much. Tasha, the company we built at our kitchen table while my parents weren't speaking to us, the life we put together with zero input from them, none of it was ever waiting on their sign-off to count. If anything, the apology was just a nice thing that happened on top of a life that was already whole without it. If you've ever had someone show back up in your life only after they noticed what you built without them, drop it in the comments below. These get read. And if any of this hit home, share it with someone who needs to hear that the life you build quietly, with nobody watching, still counts.